We are at the product stage. We're talking all about the different aspects of Jamf Pro, and to do that, of course, we need to talk about the deployment programs, DEP and VPP. And so to talk more in depth about this is our product manager for Apple integrations, Michael Devens. Michael, welcome. Take it away.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. So the goal of this session is to talk about Apple deployment programs. It's a really critical piece to being successful with any of the Apple strategies you're trying to deploy, whether that's in education or commercial. And so I want to step through making few assumptions about what you may or may not know, because there's a lot of intricacies, including some of the integration with Jamf Pro and Jamf Now, and just touch on each of the different programs. So we'll start with how to get started with these hugely valuable tools that really help organizations scale their Apple deployments. We'll talk through the different concepts in sequence here. The primary purpose of deployment programs is supporting two types of workflows. One is supporting the devices in your environment, getting those devices enrolled, and the other is getting licensed content deployed and managed on those devices. And so for these tasks, there are two programs. There's the Device Enrollment Program, DEP, and there's the Volume Purchase Program for deploying apps and books. We'll also touch on a new program, Apple School Manager, that pertains specifically to education and sort of inherits some of these programs within it. But let's get started with talking about program availability for all three of these deployment programs. Deployment programs are now available in 34 countries globally. This wasn't always the case. Not everybody knows this. This is really important. As much as we have a lot of organizations that might only exist in one or two regions, a lot of organizations have a global footprint, and being able to have a consistent enrollment experience, a consistent content deployment experience is actually really critical to an organization's success. So there are broad benefits, and the Device Enrollment Program, Volume Purchase Program, and Apple School Manager are available in these 34 countries. So we've got three different programs. Let's start by talking about devices and get into the Device Enrollment Program. So the Device Enrollment Program, DEP, is about providing a fast, streamlined way to deploy your corporate or institutionally owned devices. This is enrollment, right? This isn't a complete provisioning workflow. Provisioning is what Jamf Pro does once those devices are enrolled, but this is a critical piece of technology. And the key takeaway here is this is institutional ownership. That's a key differentiator here because it enables a number of things. It enables mandatory enrollment, a higher level of management that can only be accomplished when the organization owns those devices, as compared to a BYO model where you're not the actual owner of that hardware. And so it allows us to create some different experiences. Some of you have seen this, but we'll just step through the experience because it is really notable and distinct to the Apple platform, to the Apple ecosystem. Gone are the days of enrollment URLs, trying to track down devices to get them under management. The other thing that's unique about DEP is this notion that you can drop ship devices directly to employees, and it supports this just-in-time delivery of the content once you're enrolled. What you'll see is even on iOS 11, there's a number of native Apple applications that are actually installed upon enrollment. So really, it's about getting the resources just in time, the latest resources on those devices, shifting the burden from IT doing a lot of preparatory work to getting that content on devices at time of enrollment. It's not a silver bullet by any means, but it's increasingly this really compelling, scalable workflow. And then once those devices are enrolled, Jamf Pro can be used to seamlessly kick off smart group and provisioning activities, getting all of these Mac OS, iOS, and tvOS devices configured in exactly the right way. There's some really important characteristics about the Device Enrollment Program that help reduce the amount of work that IT needs to do, especially in advance, not needing to touch these devices before your end users do. So automatic enrollment, we just saw that. Non-removable management, which means that it's mandatory, that the devices you own will be managed by you. No one is opting out of that experience. There are additional configuration profiles and restrictions that are enabled only when devices are managed through DEP. Of course, there are some things on Mac OS like account creation at the time of enrollment. You can actually have that management account created. This enables shared iPad experience in education, requires the Device Enrollment Program to do that. And software updates management, being able to do that over the air. Mass actions, consistent deployments across your entire organization. So these types of technologies allow IT, allow you to support an increasing number of employees as compared to the number of IT staff. These ratios just start to go off the charts, and we've heard customers say as much. So starting with how to get started, if you haven't done this before, you'll visit deploy.apple.com and create your deployment program, Apple ID. Now, these are separate from the consumer iTunes Store account, so be careful not to mix and match there. One is consumer, one is deployment program, and these have two-factor authentication and the ability to add administrators, but that's your deployment program ID. The person that signs up is your deployment program agent, and then you can add administrators to be able to delegate some of those tasks to other people in your organization. Also, after you enroll, you'll get what's called a DEP customer ID. This number is the number that associates your devices with your organization and gets them into the deployment portal. Just a note, if you're purchasing through Apple, you might have an Apple customer number. If you're purchasing through a reseller, you want to make sure to provide this DEP customer ID so they know where to put your devices, because you don't necessarily get that for free. You want to make sure they know to publish those devices with Apple so when they turn on, they get properly enrolled into your Jamf Pro instance. So in terms of how to get devices into this experience, we know, of course, you can purchase from Apple, whether that's the online store or calling 1-800-MY-APPLE, working with your Apple account executive. Many customers increasingly are getting custom online business stores. You can do an online shopping experience. Reach out to your Apple team if you'd want to learn more about that. But of course, authorized resellers and carriers are important partners in this as well. You want to make sure that wherever your organization is deploying hardware, you're finding a procurement model that allows you to take advantage of DEP. In many regions, that might be through Apple, or that might be through resellers. So know that those are options that are available. And again, make sure you get that DEP customer ID to your reseller so they know to publish those devices. Just a note about what that experience looks like. So we've got a purchase that was made. Devices were published to our device enrollment program. As an IT admin, I actually get a notification saying new purchases are available. I see today some more devices have been added to that deployment portal so that I know I can get those configured properly so when employees turn them on, I know I'll be ready to go in configuring them. It's an incredibly elegant solution once you get it set up, so just making sure that you've got everything set up with your purchasing channel will enable a seamless workflow. Of course, there's one other option beyond purchasing from Apple or a reseller. We've learned about that over the summer through this fall. It's a really exciting way to get devices in, and that's by using Apple Configurator. Never been able to do this before. It's a really exciting capability. There was a big gap for some customers here in having hardware that you purchased previously, perhaps legitimately as an institution, my corporate card or otherwise, and yet they weren't associated at time of purchase, and you were sort of left out of the device enrollment program. And so there's this new option within an Apple Configurator to get these devices added to DEP. It's a really big deal. Even better than saying I'll submit paperwork or go through some process, this tool is in the hands of you. You can control this process. The basic premise is you're using Configurator 2.5 or later. This is available for iOS 11 devices and tvOS 11 devices. Make sure that those devices get updated prior to trying to go through this workflow if you haven't done that yet. There's, to balance the sort of end user security and privacy, essentially taking any device, no matter where it was purchased, and adding it to DEP, that actually has some potential severe ramifications if that end user doesn't know they're going to be managed by an institution, especially at this higher level. There's a 30-day provisional period. What that means is that when you add devices using Apple Configurator, those devices are in a provisional state where the end user clearly knows they're in that provisional state, and they have the option to leave management if they don't desire to be managed. There's no way, by the way, for this to apply to macOS. This is iOS and tvOS at this time. Of course, DEP enrollment is not mandatory for the Mac, so there's much more value in making that mandatory enrollment on iOS and tvOS. And this is really significant, especially in education, where you're not always buying new devices through formal channels. You might be purchasing other means. So giving the ability to get these devices into DEP is really compelling. And for those of you that haven't seen this, because this is brand new, Configurator just shipped a few weeks ago with this capability. I just want to talk through the workflow just so you kind of have a sense conceptually of how this works. So you start by connecting your device running iOS 11 or tvOS 11 to Apple Configurator 2.5. By the way, if you're trying to do this with a new 4K Apple TV, you'll look and look and look, and you won't find a USB port on there. It's actually done wirelessly, so you need to make sure that the Mac is running High Sierra if you want to go through this workflow with Apple TV 4K. Once these devices are connected, if you haven't used Configurator before, there's a prepare workflow. And so I can prepare these devices, and I can choose that I want to add them to the device enrollment program. Optionally, I can choose to activate and complete the enrollment. If I uncheck that box, that's okay. It leaves it at the setup assistant for the end user to go through. You might want this, for instance, in education if you want people to do an LDAP authentication, getting the user record tied to the device. I'm going to go ahead and leave that checked. Of course, I want to point it to my MDM server, so I have this set up in settings, in the preferences of Configurator. So I want it to enroll into Jamf Pro. And I want to provide it information about my organization, specifically my supervision identity, so that it's configured consistently between the configurator enrollment and any Jamf Pro enrollments that I do. Like using Jamf Pro to enroll through the device enrollment program, Apple Configurator allows me to choose which setup panes I want to show my end users. In the case of this demo, I'm actually going to skip all of those. I just wanted to blast right through those and show you the enrollment experience. So we'll say to skip all of those. And I'm also going to add a temporary Wi-Fi network for provisioning, because of course it needs to talk to the internet, get that device enrolled, and that profile can expire, for instance, after a couple hours. I don't have authenticated enrollment turned on right now. I could and put in credentials here if I wanted to. I don't have that enabled, so I'm going to skip this step. And then it's going to go through a number of preparation steps here. So it's going to go through the activation servers, adding to DEP, enrolling into MDM, and get these devices, one or many, enrolled into Jamf Pro and added into the device enrollment program. All of this completely within your control. It's really pretty exciting. So we've just watched it go through the enrollment process. I've prepared my connected devices, and those devices are now in DEP. Just a note, this process erases devices, so make sure that there's no information on there that you need. It is an erase as a part of doing the prepare workflow. Within the device enrollment program portal, there's now a new MDM server that's automatically created. It's titled Devices Added by Apple Configurator. We'll talk assignments more in a minute, but this is where all those devices will end up when you add them through the configurator workflow, and then you can treat them just as you treat any other devices, moving them around, reassigning them to different MDM servers. I mentioned briefly that you have this provisional period, right? That 30-day provisional period where an end user might actually unmanage a device, leave remote management. So let's take a look at that experience, because again, it's important to understand the focus that's put on the privacy and security of the end users as we're exerting this higher level of control, adding any devices into DEP. So this is a lock screen of a device that's been provisionally added to DEP, and you can see at the bottom, this device is managed remotely. You can leave remote management in settings. Very transparent to the end user. After 30 days, that second piece of leaving disappears. That's a fully committed device into DEP. If they go into settings, where you would traditionally look for under general settings, device management, see that enrollment profile. If it were not DEP, there's always a remove management button. In this case, it's DEP enrolled. There's a new leave remote management option. Again, available for 30 days. Just a note for educators, if you're thinking about using this workflow to bring in hardware that maybe previously you purchased secondhand, was donated by PTO or whatever, or PTA, whatever way you might have procured these devices, you might want to think about doing this in July and letting that 30-day period expire over the summer, if in fact these are institutionally owned, so that your students aren't leaving remote management, because if someone taps that button, the device unenrolls and erases. It's a secure removal, so no institutional data is compromised. It's an erase of the device. And more importantly, that serial number is actually removed from that MDM server inside of DEP. So this is both an erase, a remove, and also thirdly, removing from DEP. I'll also note, you can take advantage of DEP workflows well in this provisional period, and by that I mean I could do an MDM-initiated wipe. I could erase this device, and that serial number actually stays intact. So I might have that assigned to an MDM server even in that provisional state. When a device comes back in through the DEP enrollment workflow, as a part of that provisional experience, we see that there's an option at the time of enrollment to leave remote management. Because even in that 30 days, you could wipe and re-enroll, it's important that either that MDM server from configurator is added to your Jamf Pro or Jamf Now instance, or perhaps reassigned immediately so that you know any device that gets wiped properly re-enrolls into your organization. So we've got devices in DEP. Let's talk a little bit about how to make sure that they're receiving the proper configurations, integrating these into Jamf Pro. So zero-touch enrollment, it's a pretty powerful experience. I might determine for my organization that a uniform experience is perfectly acceptable. That's exactly what I want. Everyone needs the same enrollment experiences. But there might be reasons for me to customize that for different experiences depending on the employee. And device assignments are a critical step in determining that end user experience. So you not only need to define what MDM server it's going to enroll to, but also granular settings, how that device will be configured, how that setup assistant might be customized. So whether you have one enrollment experience or multiple, by grade or geography or department, splitting up devices allow you to create a more granular enrollment experience, and there are two ways to do that, using a Jamf Pro PreStage enrollment, organizing within Jamf Pro, or by creating multiple MDM servers within the deploy.apple.com portal. We'll talk a bit about why you'd use one over the other, but really it's about where you want to do this, this organizing and where you want to grant access to your team. So if I want to make just a single MDM server in Apple's deployment portal and link it to Jamf Pro, I can actually have multiple MDM servers within, or multiple PreStage enrollments tied to that one MDM server. So all devices go into one place in DEP and then get split out within Jamf Pro. This would, again, allow me to create distinct enrollment experiences per location or per department or whatever that might be. So this means that no one needs access to the deployment portal. I can delegate access to customizing PreStage enrollments within Jamf Pro. There's then this one-to-many relationship that exists, right? So I manage the scope by managing my PreStage enrollments. There is the option of doing auto-assign, meaning any new devices added to an MDM server can automatically get put into one of those offices, as we saw earlier. I can only do that auto-assignment once per MDM server, and then sort of manage exceptions from there, but know that I can have a one-to-many relationship and then adjust those all within Jamf Pro. Of course, the other option is to create one MDM server per PreStage enrollment, or more of a one-to-one relationship, meaning I'm creating multiple MDM servers in Apple's deployment portal, and then linking each of those MDM servers to PreStage enrollments within Jamf Pro. And by splitting up or organizing these devices more upstream, you give yourself more flexibility and afford yourself more options in how you want to scope and create different experiences. So if you're organizing those devices in DEP, you have different methods to assign within that deployment portal. So you can do by serial number, copy and paste a list of serial numbers, organize by order number, upload a CSV of serial numbers. Again, there's an option for auto-assigning new purchases to a specific MDM server, so there's some capabilities outside of Jamf Pro to organize before they ever even touch a PreStage enrollment within Jamf Pro. So the takeaway here is think about how you want to organize, how distinct those experiences are, those enrollment experiences are that you want to create for users, and then organize and assign devices appropriately between the two different portals. You have two different ways that you can organize. I also want to just reiterate, because some of you have been using some of these options. They've existed for quite some time. Apple announced this year that it's deprecated offering an unsupervised DEP enrollment, and optionally enrolling in DEP is no longer available as well. So just these keys are no longer respected on iOS 11. So just know that these aren't something that will apply to your workflow. The vast majority of customers want supervised devices and mandatory enrollment. So just know that this is a change. If you've got some existing PreStage enrollment workflows built out, they may be impacted. Another sort of public service announcement, we sometimes get support calls or Jamf Nation, we see this happen, discussions on this topic every once in a while, once a year or so. Whenever Apple introduces new software releases, those software titles have new software license agreements. And like you or I updating to High Sierra or iOS 11 on our personal devices, we read really, really carefully all of those terms and conditions, and then with good faith and good knowledge, tap accept. As an end user, I own that device, that's my responsibility. as an IT administrator, on behalf of an organization managing institutionally owned devices, I take on the responsibility of accepting those new terms and conditions for iOS 11, tvOS 11, and macOS High Sierra. And that's something that I actually am prompted to do upon the release of those new software, so it happened this September with those 3 operating systems. And until I accept those new terms and conditions, there's actually a bit of limited functionality because there's an obligation to accept those terms before proceeding. So new devices can't be assigned in the deployment portal, and administrators, those sort of delegated administrators to your deployment portal, can't log in until your primary agent logs in and accepts the terms and conditions. Again, it makes sense. You're accepting those terms on behalf of the end users, but just know that that's an important step. There is sort of an error you might see inside of Jamf Pro. It's not completely intuitive as to what that might be, so just know that this is one thing you may need to do. You will need to do. I expect they'll continue updating software. Just want to shout out too, this doesn't apply globally, but occasionally we have customers that have unique workflows. They want to tune things in different ways, and there are a bunch of things you can tune within Jamf Pro. But one of the things we shipped this fall with our 9.101 release is the ability to tune how often Jamf Pro refreshes the device list from Apple. We have customers that have some really highly automated workflows, and the default 60-minute refresh maybe wasn't a high enough interval for them to see new devices getting added. You can actually adjust that by tuning under the hood. So contact your support team if you want to learn more about that. So that's some good stuff. That was a lot. We talked about devices. Let's talk now about some of the content in your environment, specifically apps and books through Apple's Volume Purchase Program. So Apple's Volume Purchase Program makes it easy to find, buy, distribute the apps and the books your users will use on their devices. It's actually solving a couple different problems. One is MDM-initiated content installation, but it's also software license management, because whether it's free app or a paid app, these are apps that you're procuring and purchasing. There are a few different options that have evolved over time, and so these options remain. It's not to say that any one of these are perfect. The managed distribution options are likely most perfect for most organizations. Redeemable codes are slowly becoming less useful and less available. But it's about finding the right tool for the right experience you're creating, right? So let's just kind of break down these experiences so you have a bit better understanding of the differences. First thing that ever came out around app deployments, MDM, managed app deployments, was this notion of redeemable codes. Essentially, like you go to Starbucks and get the free app of the week and you enter the code. These are codes you could email to users, you could push down to devices. An Apple ID was required. It only applied to paid apps. We know that many of the apps we're managing these days are not paid. They're free, and as such, redeemable codes don't apply. The App Store is required to do this, by the way, and they're permanent assignments. There's no revoking and reassigning these when you're doing this over MDM. If, by the way, you have redeemable codes that you never actually deployed to users, they're still available. There's actually a process you can submit to request that these be converted from redeemable one-time use codes to managed licenses. So if you have 10 paid apps, you can actually convert those to managed distribution through there's a form on Apple's website where you can actually then assign those via managed distribution, reclaim those, reassign those. So if you haven't deployed all those codes, know that you can convert those. Contact the iTunes Store customer support. There's a workflow for that. So then user assignments was sort of the next big step forward, and this was a managed distribution option, meaning you can deploy, remove, redeploy. An Apple ID is required because it's about the user on the device, so it's assigning it essentially to their purchase history. They'll get an invitation via email or via push notification asking to accept applications from your org. When they type in their credentials, those apps now appear in their purchase history. MDM can initiate an installation, but this is really more of a pull model, right? Like, let's put it in your self-service. Let's put it in your purchase history so you can consume it at your desire. This applies both for free and paid apps, and it's required for iBooks. iBooks require user assignments. They cannot be device assigned. iBooks are also permanently assigned. There's no reclaiming and reassigning those. So just some distinct characteristics here. And then with iOS 9 and Mac OS, oh man, I'm losing the numbers, 10.11, a couple years ago now, device assignments became an option. Big headline functionality here, no Apple ID required. The number of times we heard from our customers and the community that I just want to deploy apps. I don't want to make someone sign in with an Apple ID, type passwords, share Apple IDs, share passwords, a bunch of things that weren't ideal to supporting a great experience. Device assignments is a big win in this area. No Apple ID required. Be able to push out both free and paid apps. Of course, iBooks are not supported, but it really allows you to give that really transformative experience of device enrolls, apps deploy even before a user's even logged into anything. One license required per device. If I have an iPhone and an iPad, that consumes 2 licenses because there's no user tied to those. There's no Apple ID tied, so it's 1 per device, but it greatly reduces the friction of those deployments. Vast majority of customers are taking this approach in deploying apps. I'll mention, by the way, if you have a bunch of user assignments and you want to convert those to device assignments, there's a knowledge base article on jamf.com. You can find out about how to convert from user assigned to device assigned without needing to revoke and reinstall that app, without needing to lose data or even message the user, so you can do that silently in the background. Just some minimum requirements here. El Capitan, that's what I couldn't remember. iOS 7 for user assignment, Mavericks for user assignment, and then iOS 9 and macOS 10.11 or later for doing device assignments. Be able to deploy those, no Apple ID required with the device assignments, and reassign those. Again, retaining ownership of this content you're purchasing, critically important. By the way, you can actually determine which apps support this device assignment as a part of the VPP store listing. This was more of an issue when it first came out and developers hadn't yet checked the box saying allow device assignable apps. So when iOS 9 came out, for instance, this was not as predominantly available. It's pretty widely available now, but there's some metadata down the left side there, and you can see device assignable. If you're ever trying to deploy an app and you're having issues with device assignments, know that this is obviously an important criteria, and we've had a number of customers reach out to developers who just needed to check the box, publish an updated version of their app, and that app can now be assigned directly to the device. There's one other technology kind of related to this that I want to talk about, and it's tethered caching within macOS. So there are a variety of reasons you might want to use this, but with macOS 10.12.4 or later, new capabilities were introduced to the Mac that can actually act as a local tethered caching server, supporting iOS 10.3 or later. Connecting via USB initiates an MDM check-in, provides network over USB, and also locally caches any of the content that comes down over the wire through that Mac. So if I'm installing the same apps, the same books, it's cached the first time and then not consuming any additional network bandwidth for any subsequent installations. So this isn't something that necessarily is required for a number of workflows, but there are some really unique provisioning scenarios or carts that block Wi-Fi that might benefit from some of these, either network extension over USB or smart content caching where there's limited bandwidth in an organization. That might have an impact on your provisioning workflow. And actually specific to that end, we introduced a capability with a release over the summer, 9.100, giving more granular control to IT admins. So we now expose an option to make that tethered connection a requirement for app installation. So you might have a population of apps that are large. There's some large apps out there these days. That paired with perhaps some bandwidth constraints, you might want to say only install certain applications when they're on a tethered connection. It's actually a parameter we get as a part of an MDM device check-in. We can see it's a tethered connection, and we can make that a condition upon which we install certain titles. So just something I wanted to point out, not for everybody, but could be useful depending on your environment and your infrastructure. Another helpful tip, some changes over the years around VPP content distribution, a helpful thing to know because it wasn't always the case, but what Apple's done to make multinational deployments more accessible and more available. If you purchase a title in your, let's say here in the US, I don't need to purchase that app in the UK App Store to deploy to my UK employees. There was a time where it wasn't as elegant or as transient, but I can now purchase VPP content in any of those 34 countries and deploy to any of those 34 countries. The criteria is not purchasing in each country, but rather that the app I buy in the US also needs to be available in the App Store of that device's country. So when they set up and say I'm in the UK, that App Store needs to have the listing as well, but my US purchases can be installed on those devices as well because it's still pulling from that region's App Store. Also, just to mention, there are times where you might either want completely custom apps that you want someone to build for you and deploy. but you love the convenience and flexibility of the volume purchase program. There's a way to have apps built and privately distributed. This is referred to as the business-to-business or B2B app store. And it actually puts those purchases right alongside your consumer or enterprise, as it were, app purchases within VPP. A lot of organizations also use this to white label existing titles, contact the vendor saying, we love your app, but we'd love a version of it styled or customized in some way. The B2B App Store allows for that type of customization, deploying right alongside App Store apps through the volume purchase program. Just a note about expiration. These VPP tokens expire annually. And so you just want to make sure to keep those renewed. If it lapses a couple days, just go grab a new token. There's not a high cost or penalty for that lapsing, but it does interrupt your ability to deploy. The other thing that not a lot of people know is if the Apple ID tied to that VPP token goes through a password reset, that token expires immediately. Sometimes the VPP token stops working after a couple months, and you're like, what's going on here? Someone may have reset the password, so helpful tip, just be aware of that. Another tuning tip I want to share, this is something we added recently just in our 9.101 release this fall. So as you can imagine, app deployment, like that's a really compelling aspect of customizing your deployment. And especially in education, but in all organizations, like deploying a lot of apps is kind of a thing, right? And that can actually be a pretty time-consuming process to chew through license assignments and do this at a really large scale, like tens of thousands of devices. And over time, we've followed the enhancements that Apple's added to their specification to say, do multiple threads when you talk to VPP. Okay, actually, now you can do batching as it comes to VPP communications. Most recently, they've given guidance on how we can support both of those things. And so with the release of 9.101, we've added support to tune the number of parallel threads that are talking to VPP. So they're still batching license assignments, but now you can do that batching concurrently, split up by app title. What that means is if it took 5 apps, 5 days to chew through license assignments and install, I could say do 5 concurrent titles at a time. And assuming math is somewhat linear, which our testing indicates it's pretty representative, that actually goes closer to 1 day versus 5 days. If I wanted to do 1 app faster, it doesn't help me, but up to 5 simultaneous titles can be processing in parallel with VPP, split by Atom ID, by app ID. So a really helpful performance technology as it relates to large-scale VPP deployment. Last but certainly not least, I want to just touch on Apple School Manager. We have a more education-focused session following this one as well, but it's a critical piece of the deployment program story, and it has a lot of relationship to sort of standing on the shoulders of giants, as it were, with what's been built in the Device Enrollment Program and the Volume Purchase Program, education-specific functionality built in as well. So Apple School Manager is relatively new. It's just about 1.5 years old, and it's a simple web-based portal for IT admins to manage the people, the devices, and the content in their organization all from one place. It's a really elegant solution. If you're in education and you're familiar with it, you believe me, and if you haven't, you really should check it out. And in this short time that it's been available, it's become a really compelling solution for our education customers. Apple School Manager, as I said, takes the best capabilities from the Device Enrollment Program with the best device management experience, package them up with some specific education enhancements. Of course, has integration with the Volume Purchase Program, being able to link out to the education VPP store, wrapped in a completely brand new experience for schools. So if you haven't yet adopted, there are a few things I'll just point out, and we covered some of this stuff last year, so I won't go in great detail. But you want to make sure to associate all of your disparate VPP accounts. It's often the case that different schools, different buildings, different ed techs have made VPP tokens, different budget centers, et cetera. Getting those associated prior to upgrading and defining your structure for managed IDs. These are some of the things you'll do. And there's actually, you see in the lower right-hand corner, that's Apple's support article that gives the full detail about how to prepare for moving to Apple School Manager. And then there's an upgrade process. Again, you can see the full article in the lower right-hand corner there. But this pertains to upgrading your organization, auditing the roles, and seeing how those transpose to the new world of Apple School Manager and the roles and permissions tied within there. And of course, how to make sure that your managed Apple ID domain format is correct. These are some of the things you'll do in preparing for and in upgrading. And then there's a step of actually switching. So now instead of going to deploy.apple.com, you'll be visiting school.apple.com. Of course, if you aren't using deployment programs at all, you can head directly to school.apple.com to learn more, get your organization signed up. In addition to the Device Enrollment Program, device management capabilities that we've talked at length about, There's a really compelling set of functionality for educators in the form of student information system integration. 3 SIS vendors integrate directly at an API level with Apple School Manager: PowerSchool, SunGard eSchool Plus, and Infinite Campus. This solves a number of big headaches for schools. SIS vendors are they have an array of protocols, an array of tables. It's a really complex data set, massive amounts of data. And that data is driving the learning experience, so it's critical to have an elegant way to interact with it. And so it's an amazing solution that Apple's built this in so that as an MDM solution, we can provide compatibility. Even as they build out functionality, we have a single consistent API. Really allows this experience to scale. Within Apple School Manager, I also have the ability to then manage these people and these classes. So granular control over those environments for both staff and students. Accounts get generated automatically, right, in syncing with your student information system. If you've worked with Apple IDs and students before, there have been some different ways of doing this in the past, namely the Apple ID for Students program. This is a huge advancement over that experience, putting that process in the control of IT with some special customization of these IDs as well. And supporting more delegated access workflows, which is really important to make sure that there's no one single point of failure or point of friction when it comes to getting access to managing content, managing people, resetting passwords, et cetera. You have granular control over how to get people involved without losing control as an organization. So really nice functionality here. Of course, the Device Enrollment Program, as I said, is built in. It's integrated right into Apple School Manager. There's a device management section. Recent addition, late breaking news, like weeks, you can actually define by platform type which MDM server a device should get added to. So all the Macs go into this MDM server, all the iPads go into that MDM server. Some really exciting enhancements in that regard. And I'll also point out that if you're wanting to create a shared iPad experience in your organization, the Device Enrollment Program and having those devices in this Device Enrollment Program tied to Apple School Manager is a requirement for shared iPad. As I said, it's embedded right in here, the single place to manage your devices, unlocking all of that zero-touch management. And then as it relates to apps and books, today Apple School Manager has an apps and books section that links you right out to your volume purchase program account, and all of those content managers still have access to all of their VPP tokens. Apple previewed this summer at WWDC some exciting functionality coming with the ability to actually transfer available content between locations, essentially move content between VPP tokens. Maintaining institutional ownership over that content as well. So if an ed tech leaves, you don't lose access to that Apple ID and subsequently lose access to the content. This functionality is coming soon. A great enhancement to the experience for IT and any of the content managers involved, being able to discover, purchase, assign, transfer that content. Again, getting more people involved in the process is a key theme here. There are some organizations that are doing some bleeding edge delegated management. This just catapults that experience forward. So that's Apple School Manager, SIS integration for classes and user management, managed Apple ID creation, device enrollment program for device management, and then volume purchase program, apps and books management. Again, visit school.apple.com to enroll. So we've covered a lot. We've talked about device enrollment program and all of the streamlined enrollment capabilities, talked about content management and deployment with the volume purchase program, talked about Apple School Manager and all of the things that that brings to us. It really is an exciting story, and what I want to sort of leave people with is this, this story, this narrative about how Apple deployment programs paired with a management solution like Jamf Pro or Jamf Now really allows you to leverage the power of your tools to create the best user experiences even at scale. So thank you very much for the time. Appreciate the attention. We'll take questions at the end, but thank you very much.
Big round of applause. Great job, Michael. So we've got 2 microphones set up if folks would like to line up for them. And as a special treat too, we also have Jeremy Butcher, part of Worldwide Product Marketing at Apple, to answer some of our deployment questions as well too. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hey.
Yep.
Thanks, Jeremy.
No problem.
We got one right here.
Hi. So we are currently, we have that integration with PowerSchool and for shared model and all that stuff, and everything's working mostly great. We are probably 35% of the way to a one-to-one, and I foresee in the next few years maybe a need to have more access to more of the data that's in PowerSchool to create smart groups and assign apps and that kind of thing. Is there anything in the pipeline as far as making the data that's in PowerSchool more accessible within Jamf so that we can put it to use?
I'll speak to part of that, and I don't know if Jeremy will have anything to add. So there's something called the roster API. That's the protocol through which we communicate to Apple School Manager. It gives us a number of data points. If you haven't looked at it, there is documentation available, but it wasn't always as exposed in Jamf Pro. More of it is exposed now for you to see. Not all of it is yet exposed for you to scope against for smart groups and things. I absolutely hear you. We recognize that there's some rich metadata that comes from your student information system through that API. That would be really valuable to allow you to scale smart groups and things like that. So it's within our power to do more there. We intend to. We just want to make sure we do it in a way that'll be performance and scalable. Beyond that, there's obviously a lot of data and custom data in SIS systems, and so I don't know to what extent there's more to say there, but I'll just give you an opportunity if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, I mean, if there's stuff that is in PowerSchool that's not making its way into Apple School Manager, because that's kind of the step, obviously, before the roster API, let us know what it is so we can work with PowerSchool. Because some of it might be in our control, and some of it might be stuff that we need to go back to PowerSchool to kind of enhance their API that we're using to get the stuff at Apple School Manager.
And I'm just thinking, like, when we assign apps in the future, like we'll be assigning it to on the 7th grade level or to English specific, you know, all that data is in PowerSchool, obviously.
Yeah.
So, and that should be the simple stuff. So
Yep.
as that becomes more accessible to us, I think that'll be
And some of that's available
great.
to us. It might be more relational. You know, if you're in a 7th grade class, then you might be considered a 7th grader, et cetera. But yeah, there's more that we can do there. So
Okay.
great point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm from a school in Australia, and at the moment we've got the kids keep their Apple IDs at the end, and we've manually created them through the old scripting process. I know it's not the best practice, but it's so that they can keep the apps when they finish school. Now, I don't know if it's here in the US, but in Australia, the Apple has changed the iTunes store so that you can't select none as a credit card anymore. So you have to enter a credit card when you want to create these Apple IDs. So we were looking at using Apple School Manager, but is there a way for the kids to keep the Apple ID that's created in Apple School Manager for when they finish school?
No, there is not the ability to do that. Sorry, I was going to say not yet, but that's not even true. There's not a way to do that. So we definitely want you to go down the path of creating managed Apple IDs. There's just a ton of reasons, both from just a technical perspective, but also what we didn't talk about is like Apple School Manager has been designed in a way that's also protecting you and your students from a data security and privacy perspective. So having one of those managed Apple IDs that is specifically designed for education means that there's functionality that isn't there on purpose in order to present a better experience from a privacy perspective. But it's good feedback. I mean, that's all I can kind of say at this point is that we hear you on that in terms of making sure that folks keep the apps. So.
Yeah, so at the moment when they leave, the apps come back to us.
Yeah.
There's no real way around that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yep.
Hi, I'm actually local here to the Minneapolis area. I'm not in the school sector of things. That said, we have done DEP, VPP. It's been super awesome. Everything that we hand out to our employees is strictly corporate. We don't do anything bring your own, so that makes things really simplified. But a lot of the features I see in the school management portion aren't available to someone like me that might be useful. Is there, because the Apple IDs, like with the VPP, we don't want, there's no need for them, but in the future, like, you know, if we wanted to FaceTime or whatever, right now it's all blocked out, but is there something in the pipeline where that might be available to just a regular business to manage Apple IDs in bulk?
So I'll say a couple things. The first is that if we would have done this presentation a couple of years ago, before Apple School Manager, the screenshots for the education experience and the business experience would have been the same. So the reality is that Apple School Manager, the infrastructure that that's built on, is essentially, you know, the next generation of these deployment programs, generally speaking. We'd love to get business to that new architecture at some point. With regards to managed Apple IDs for business, the thing that we're looking at is really pushing on why, like you said, if you don't need them to deploy apps, what is the use case that you're interested in having a managed Apple ID for? It's not to say that it doesn't exist. It's just a question of, like, we really want to understand what it is that you do with that kind of thing.
Like FaceTime, for example, if we wanted to do, video calling, it works great, but it requires an Apple ID, so then we'd have to unlock that. They'd have to make their own, so.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we're curious about learning more from folks, and you, again, can answer this question, is if your employee has their own Apple ID already, would they just sign in and use that? And if you gave them one, would they sign out with their personal one? Or would they say, yeah, you know what, I already have one, so I'm just going to keep the one that I have? So there's questions about mixing work and personal. If you have two different Apple IDs, how do you want to structure that? Do we have to support multiple logins for an individual service? Do you place a FaceTime work call versus personal? There's just lots of ripple effect that kind of comes down from that.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, we've had lots of conversations about it.
Sure.
But it's really, because there's so many ramifications downstream, we've been kind of peeling away at the reasons for it all for the time being.
Sure.
So.
Okay. Thank
so
you.
We're running a little bit out of time, but we have room for 2 more questions here. This gentleman first, and then over here.
All right, thanks. First, Michael, nice job at the foosball table last night. But this actually ties a lot into the last question. So we've been using VPP and DEP for quite a while. Dipped my toe in ASM 2 summers ago and didn't work out. But anyway, we're looking to integrate with PowerSchool. We don't really have a need for the Apple IDs for the students generally. So my question is, am I better off using the SIS importer, integrator, whatever it's called, directly with PowerSchool, or better off going through ASM? And if I do the latter, I do have to still create managed Apple IDs, correct?
So the SIS importer being a tool that Jamf has to allow you to take data directly into Jamf Pro. I would say the distinction between the 2 options you provided are, should Apple School Managed be a part of my workflow or not? To make it really simplify question, there are a lot of valuable reasons to use Apple School Manager, and I'm sure Jeremy could go on more about them than I will, but I want to make sure that you keep in mind what the experiences you're trying to create. And we'll talk more about this at length in the next session, but if you don't need the managed Apple IDs, you don't need shared iPad, you don't care about the more modern deployment programs as it relates to your requirements, that might not be something you need right now, but it really is a forward-looking investment in technology and a scalable technology beyond what the SIS importer can support. So there are people that use SIS importer today because it does exactly what they need, and that's great. There's a lot more unlocked and a lot more capability when using Apple School Manager, assuming it doesn't have limitations, doesn't impose limitations on your workflow. Do you have any other things to add there?
Yeah, I mean, so to explicitly answer your question, if you do SIS integration into Apple School Manager, it creates managed Apple IDs. So yes. Having said that, you can create all those IDs and not deploy them, and they just sit there and they're essentially dormant IDs. And so as things change, you get the benefits of all the roster data flowing down into Jamf, but it's not a mandatory use of the managed Apple ID, but it does create them all.
Okay, great, thanks.
Last question?
Alrighty, hi. I'm in the healthcare industry, and we are putting iPads in the hands of patients within hospitals, and DEP plays a pretty important functional role to allow us to wipe the device in between patients and then be able to recover from that and automatically re-enroll in Jamf. But we find there's limitations with DEP around the terms of service, right? So it's organization devices, own devices deployed within that organization, using that organization's MDM. But functionally, it's really important for that key workflow. Is there future where we're going to be able to achieve the same thing, but potentially my company could offer a turnkey solution where we're deploying our iPads enrolled in our DEP program or something akin into our client hospitals. Does that make sense?
Not exactly. Could you explain a little bit more about what you're trying to accomplish? I mean, I understand the whole, like, put the iPad in the hands of the patient part, but like...
Gotcha. The goal is to be able to provide a service business model to our client hospitals where they don't own the iPads. They don't own the MDM. They just want to pay us to do all those things.
Got it.
And we want to, but deploying those iPads into their hospitals to be owned by my company in our MDM, completely managed by us as sort of a turnkey thing. But DEP currently, terms of service, don't support that model.
Terms and conditions kind of question more than it is a functionality. Got it.
Terms and conditions, or if we can replicate the functionality not using DEP. Is there anything like that on the horizon?
Yeah, we should probably take this one offline because it's probably a longer answer than we have time for. The short answer is that, as you saw, it's not possible today. There are, as you can imagine, many use cases like yours that have slight variations. And ultimately, it's just us kind of catching up with the right way to phrase all these things from an agreement perspective without going too broad. So we should kind of talk a little bit about what specifically it is that you guys would need. But we've definitely heard, like I said, tons of requests where the idea is that there's essentially a managed service where ownership is not tied to the folks that are using the device day to day. So
Great. That's a great one to end on. Thank you again, Michael and Jeremy. Round of applause.